Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only item, reporting out of closed session tonight, the motion is to receive the closed session report and the confidential direction to staff be confirmed.
Okay, someone like to move that? Councilor Gallo, Councilor Kim, comments, questions? Record a vote.
Recorded vote has been requested for the first item, the only item on tonight's agenda for reporting out of closed session. Councilor Gallo, how do you vote? Councilor Gallo votes yes. Councilor Thompson? Councilor Thompson votes yes. Mayor Marakis?
Yes.
Councilor Kim? Councilor Kim votes yes. Councilor Weiss? Councilor Weiss votes yes. Councilor Gillen? Councilor Gillen votes yes. And Councilor Gardner? Councilor Gardner votes yes, and motion carries.
Thank you. Confirming bylaw, who would like to move that? Councilor Thompson. Councilor Gallo. All those in favor? Opposed, that carries. Motion to adjourn. Councilor Kim, Councilor Weiss, all those in favor? Opposed, that carries. Madam Deputy Clerk, the time is 7:01. I'm going to call this council meeting to order. Town of Aurora acknowledges that the Anishinaabe lands on which we live and work are the traditional and treaty territory of the Chippewas of China Island, as well as many other nations whose presence here continues to this day. As the closest First Nation community to Aurora, we recognize the special relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and waters of this territory. They are the water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and as a municipality, we join them in these responsibilities. We further acknowledge that Aurora is part of the treaty lands of the Mississaugas and Chippewas recognized through Treaty Number 13, as well as the Williams Treaties of 1923. Shared understanding of the rich cultural heritage that has existed for centuries and how our collective past brought us to where we are today will help us walk together into a better future. Council, can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Councilor Weiss, Councilor Kim, comments or questions? Call the vote. Councilor Gardner? Councilor Gardner's yes. That carries. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. No community presentations, no delegations. We're moving to the consent agenda. Someone like to move the consent agenda? Councilor Gallo, seconder. Councilor Weiss, thank you. Any comments or questions on the consent agenda? Call a vote. That carries. Move to committee of the whole meeting report November 5th. Any items that anyone would like to pull? Councilor Gallant.
5.4.
8.5.4. Thank you. Anything else? Councilor Gallo. 8.8.3. Thank you. Councilor Thompson, did you? Oh, you were going to pull the same one? Okay. Any other? Councilor Gardner?
8.8.1.
8.8.1. Thank you. Any others? So can I get a motion to approve all items minus 8.5.4, 8.8.1, and 8.8.3? Councilor Weiss, Councilor Thompson. I'll call the vote. That carries. So we'll move to 8.5.4. Councilor Gillen, you pulled this one. Did you want to move the recommendation? Do we not need to move the whole thing? Yeah. Counselor, I'm gonna have to get someone else to move it because we need to move the whole thing because that's the recommendation coming out of council. So it needs to either be defeated or we can do that at committee where we just receive it to put it on the first. Does someone want to move the recommendation? Counselor Gardner, thank you. Seconder. Counselor Thompson, thank you. Counselor Gillian, go ahead.
Thank you. I had a few questions about this, and I know I had asked some questions last time, and it just wasn't 100% clear, so I wanted to kind of reiterate that. First question for you, Mr. Mayor, Ms. Wainwright McKessel. Is there anything in this current policy now that would change the way the presenters or the community partners would present to council and how they conduct business with the town now?
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So there's been no changes to the way that the budget process runs or the way they conduct business now. What would happen is prior to releasing the funds that were approved through the budget process, finance team would do a review to make sure that they meet the requirements of the policy to ensure that only the amounts according to the policy get released to them.
Counselor.
Thank you. And then the other question I had, is there anything in this policy that points to a reserve threshold as far as what would be qualifying for any funding? I know in other organizations, they look at the reserves, and if they already have 100% of operating, then that wouldn't necessarily qualify for a presenter to come asking for additional funds. Do we have anything that outlines that?
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, the policy restricts it to 12 months operations, but we do consider other factors. So if the organization has an asset management reserve and they have a asset management plan in place, or at least a plan on how they're going to spend those funds for capital related funds, then that is not considered as part of the reserves because that's going towards capital. And if there's anything else that's like a special purpose type reserve. So for example, if they received a grant from another agency to deliver something very specific, then those pieces would get sectioned off.
Counselor.
Thank you. It just seems really broad, and obviously this is really new to us. And I think the last question I asked was, what are the municipalities that you can have as examples? And you said none. So I'm really just, I'm tiptoeing around this being a town doing this for the first time and setting some precedents. And from what I understand, we're using, the Interior Trail Fund Association. It's a really big corporation. That's what they do. And I just want to make sure that if we are testing the waters on this, that, perhaps to kind of go in with, tiptoe in to make sure that we're being accountable to everybody in the taxpayers, because we want to see everything going on. And I understand that we have that 250 threshold, and it makes me a little bit nervous. And I have gone on to the government's website, and it does suggest that between 50 and 250 that an audit must be conducted. However, members can pass a special resolution to require review engagement instead. So essentially all it's saying is that, they could ask the town to review it to see if everything's kosher and there's no misstatements and so forth. But I think at the end of the day as well, as councillors, we want to see and understand and review all the documents just as equally, not to say that what staff's reviewing is correct. It's just us seeing the information for ourselves to make sound decisions as well. Comparing with that, I could easily suggest that, as somebody who's been involved in campaigns, that if you were running for, a federal election, you spend $100,000, you had to have audited financials. It's mandatory. So there are other situations to where it's not abnormal to have to submit audited financials at a threshold that's much lower. So I'm just curious as to why we chose the 250. I know there's costs, but $100,000 is a lot. And for me, I'd be leaning at that $100,000 threshold. We are a small town. We're not a huge corporation in that sense when it comes to big cities. And I just really want to make sure we're being responsible.
I think
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So part of the consideration for that threshold is the actual cost of an audit. An audit is quite expensive, especially once an audit firm is required to provide an unqualified or qualified opinion because there's liability associated with that once the auditors do provide that opinion. And for a audit for a small business, they can start around $7,000 a year. So an organization that's quite small it's a fairly large expense for them to pay. Where right now, some of the smaller organizations, what they are doing is they are actually getting smaller accounting firms to actually provide like an assurance. They're not providing an audit opinion, but they're doing an engagement to provide accurate financial statements, and they're still bound by the ethical obligations that all CPAs are required to adhere to.
Counselor.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I guess, I can use an example. I understand when it's a lot lower threshold, throw in the BIA having to spend $4,000 or $5,000. I understand that. Although they were probably at that time only taking in $40,000, not a lot. When you're looking at 100 or 125 or whatever that threshold is, it's sometimes the cost of doing business. And you hope that, if you're going to grow that much bigger, then you're not going to be affected by it. And I just really want to be able to ensure that you have those line by line items. We don't necessarily get that with just financials. And we get that with the majority of all our community partners. This is our first time we're actually setting a precedence. So I'm just a little nervous setting the bar so high. So is there an issue if we decided as council that we wanted to lower that to say $100,000? And then if we decide to want to change that later because we found it was onerous on our community partners, then we could make that decision later.
Through you,
Mr. Mayor, I think part of the challenge would be if we load it down to $100,000, then maybe some community partners are no longer able to deliver some of the services they planned on, because now they would have to spend a chunk of that money on actually doing an audit engagement. The other part is the financial statements only tell you certain information. They don't tell you complete information from doing a complete review. As you know, with the information that we provide to council on a regular basis, we put it more in the budget format because it's easier for council to understand where the variances are and how we're spending against what we promised to spend for the community. Whereas the financial statements are done on a full accrual basis of accounting, and there's so many different adjustments that are made that it can be a little difficult to understand at times. So when finance is doing the review of the information that's coming from the community partners, we're not just looking at the financial statements themselves. We will be asking questions and we'll be digging deeper into the information.
Counselor.
Thank you. And I guess my follow-up to that, because it says, I don't know what's in the policy that we've created, but just if we are referring to the Canadian standard of sorts, saying the members can pass special resolution to require review engagement. So have we put some sort of a resolution in that policy that suggests if there's no audit that it's required that there is that review engagement through the town?
Through you,
Mr. Mayor. So the review engagement is done by a CPA and to generate the statements. It's another form of providing the service without doing a full complete audit and providing the audit opinion. Regardless of whether the organization has done an audit or not, there will still be an evaluation done by the town. We will still dig into the information. We will still ask questions, regardless if it's one of the larger organizations that we have or even one of our smaller ones. The ones that have not done an audit where there's not a full audit opinion, we may ask for more information. But again, it's a smaller organization, smaller number of transactions and smaller amount of monies that we're dealing with. So it's a lot easier for us to dig in and get into the details than what it would be for one of the larger organizations that we support.
Counselor.
Okay, so finally, just kind of understanding the meat of it, and I'm just trying to figure out how is it that we can get in council's hands. So once this extra information, say for sake of an example, it was chosen that they were going to do review engagement instead, and you got that information. How can we ensure that council gets that same information at the time of these presentations? Because I don't feel that we always get this information in a timely manner.
Part of the process that we will be following, through you, Mr. Mayor. Part of the process that we will be following while we do this is we will be following up with Finance Advisory Committee to report back on what the actual release of funds was and the reasoning behind it. The community partners do provide statements to Finance Advisory Committee when they do their line by line reviews, and they also included them in the budget packages that they provided for the annual budget process too.
Counselor, you got your 5 minutes.
Thank you. I will let other councillors speak, but I do believe that there was some additional information we didn't receive, but I will speak to it later.
Thank you. Councillor Weiss.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, probably to our treasurer. I want to thank you for the work that you've done on this and through financial advisory, because it's a step in the right direction towards accountability for all of our community partners. So I thank you for that. Can you just for the public notice the difference between statutory, obligatory, and restricted funds? Because what typically happens, and I've been in that situation myself, is where you want to take a fund that is a general fund, and then you want to split it into 5 different funds, and you have your board say, well, this is for asset management of this, and it's for that. And so basically your general operating fund gets down below the threshold that you have, but you've got this money sitting over here in another pot. And there's in your policy, you also identify the ability to be able to move and transfer funds from one to another, which basically means it's all in one pot of funds. So I'd like you to answer a couple of questions about the transfer of funds from one identified fund to the other, and how that will be managed. And then define the words obligatory and statutory for me, if you wouldn't mind, through you, Mayor.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So for the reserve transfers, one of the things that we will look at as part of the review is the opening and closing balances of the reserves that are provided by each of the organizations. And we'll be looking into the transfers to and from those reserves and what they were used from. That provides the clarity to ensure that the reserves are being used appropriately. Once we get into different types of reserves and different purposes of reserves, there's certain types of reserves. For example, for the town, we have development charge reserves. We have legislation that covers development charge reserves and what they can and cannot be used for. And then there's also the development charge study that identifies the projects that can be used from. So there's a lot of restrictions around what those can be used for, versus a general reserve that's funded through tax levy. For example, our asset management reserves are more discretionary in nature. We get to move money between the different asset management funds, or we get to decide how much we want to put in because it's us funding those reserves ourselves. Same with the tax stabilization reserves. It's when you get into these obligatory ones, they're usually centered around something with legislation around it, or there could be a grant that the community partner has received. And there's a very specific purpose for which that grant can be used for. So it can only be used for that purpose and cannot be assigned to something else. And that's where it gets into the statutory and obligatory and discretionary reserves. Personally, I like to just look at the reserves themselves, look at what the purpose of them is and what's driving behind them. But we will look at the transfers between reserves, because part of that transfers between reserves is also the surplus or deficit that occurs at the end of the year. So we need to make sure we also understand what that is as well.
Councilor?
Answers it perfectly. Thank you.
Councilor Thompson?
Through to you, to Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel. Just want to follow up in terms of the 6 partner organizations that were identified in the report. I assume, that they're accepting of the policy and in agreement, but just wanted to get confirmation through you, Mrs. Wainwright.
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we did reach out to all of the organizations to receive feedback. We incorporated that feedback in the version that we'd originally went to FAC with to make some adjustments to ensure that we were making sure that this policy would work for their operations as well.
Thank you. Just want to make sure that they're fully aware of their obligations and there's no surprises.
Any other comments, questions? All the Councilor Yellen, second time.
Thanks. I just want to have some follow up on the different buckets and so forth. So I get the answer you were talking about having specific uses. I know we went through that with the BIA and then you can only use it for certain things. When it comes to what your maximum, when you're saying the 12 months operation, and you had also talked about asset management and so forth. So specifically within that 12-month of operation, if there was something within the organization that they needed to fix or do something or whatnot, you're saying that wouldn't apply within the operating? Because I would think that if you're operating, that's the cost of doing business. All of a sudden you have to repair a roof or whatever it is you need to do. I'm just trying to understand what that threshold is, because it's just, there's so many buckets. You could probably have twice the amount of reserve than in 1 year, but it's all kind of split up in arms. And I just want to just understand it a little bit more clearly on what that defines as the operating.
Ms. Moira Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the determination of distributing the funds will be done based on their budget and their prior year financial statements so that we understand where their reserve position is to what they're planning to spend in the year. Should something come along during the year, then that would be the type of thing that would typically come out of their capital fund if it was a capital type of repair or betterment in an asset that they had. But again, at the end of the year, one of the things we are going to be looking at before releasing the funds the next year is what those opening and closing reserve balances are. So we have to go based on what they're planning to spend, because these organizations, even 1 year of operations from reserve, having that cash on hand is not always enough to essentially make sure that everything can continue to be a going concern, depending on the timing of when the funds commence. We have to make some assumptions based on what we're provided at budget time, but things will get adjusted year over year as we go forward.
Counselor.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. And I know over the last 6 years, we've been very diligent talking with our community partners about their reserves and how they anticipate on using them. And I think it's really important that we do set a threshold. And so that's why I'm engaging these conversations. What I want to ensure as council is that when we do go through this process and there is that review engagement, if that's what organizations choose to do between the $50,000 and the $250,000 threshold, I'm fine with that. But I want to ensure that council is actually getting that information prior to making these decisions, because there have been times when we are receiving presentations. It's not just this year, it's previous years on other organizations where we don't have the full picture. And I want to make sure that this policy is going to be outlined so we receive that. So is there something within this policy that would ensure that we would receive this information in a timely fashion so we'd all have the same information before we set the budget?
Ms. Moira Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the intent of the policy is that the budget would be set and the release of funds after the approval of the budget will be determined by this policy. So if there's an abundance in the reserve, then that excess in the reserve would reduce the amount that actually gets paid to the community partner. And then the difference would run as a variance on the operating budget and contribute to the town surplus. That could then be reevaluated as we come forward for the next round of budget deliberations. The reason that we're not looking at it from a perspective of reducing the budget request each year is because that could create a lot of variability in the operating budget. And depending on that amount of variability, it could start having us have to take out money and then put money back in each year for various community partners. And that doesn't stabilize the tax levy over the long term. So this approach stabilizes the tax levy. Any surplus that's generated stays with the town and follows the surplus management policy that the town approves.
Counselor.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Just as a follow-up comment, and I totally get what you're saying, and I don't disagree. I just really want to make sure that we have historical content so we can see the trends and where things are going, so we can look at things with a long-term vision, short-term vision, and then make decisions moving forward. Obviously, we want to have everybody successful. We want to ensure that we're spending your tax dollars appropriately. We want to make sure that we're supporting the community partners in a way that makes sense. But at the same time, we need to have that information historically and in the future. So for me, I want to make sure that this policy is going to outline that to ensure that we all have the same information at the same time. So through Mr. Mayor, Ms. Van Kessel, is this policy going to help council with that type of information moving forward?
Ms. Moira Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So there will be the reporting back. So after we have done our analysis and we've determined how much will be released, there will be the reporting back on the variance or how much is actually released to each of the community partners. And we plan to do that through the Finance Advisory Committee, and those minutes would appear on with council. It would also then help us inform our future budgets with our community partners, because then we could start asking questions about, is this a long-term sustained lower spending, or is this, one-time analysis? Like we can actually dig into it more at that point in time as we go forward.
Counselor.
Thank you. And finally, you had mentioned the Finance Advisory Committee taking a look and these items being on the agenda. So are you suggesting that any reviews that are done and it's presented to the Financial Advisory Committee, that it is not presented in the community partners book, that it's up to council to go back to Finance Advisory Committee minutes and see that it's there and then look at the information, and that's that spot? Is that what we're suggesting? I'm just a little confused.
Ms. Moira Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So what will happen is finance will do the review, determine how much gets released and flow the funds to community partner. We'll put a memo on the Finance Advisory Committee agenda and have the discussion there with Finance Advisory Committee about what happened and what our review entailed so that the Finance Advisory Committee is advised. Those minutes would then appear on the council agenda.
Counselor?
Thank you. So from what I'm hearing is that if there was some additional information presented to the finance committee and the finance committee discuss it, that it would not come to council. It would be up to council to look at those meeting minutes and review that, but we're not having a discussion to actually have our own opinion or say about it. That's kind of how I'm understanding it. Is that correct?
Mayor Van Kessel?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the information would be provided to Finance Advisory Committee as information to them. It's not Finance Advisory Committee determining how much funds get released.
Counselor?
Thank you. Okay, so I guess my only comment is that with this kind of information, I do believe that all councils should be receiving this. I understand with the finance committee, it does comprise of three out of the 7 council members. And I think this is a very important thing that all this information is available to council and we're notified. I know I certainly cannot be on the ball with every agenda item on every committee that passes by. And if this is something that is going to be reviewed, that I think this is something we should specifically be notified with, especially when it's a community partner that's going to be asking and presenting for additional funds to the town. So I don't know how I go about addressing that because I can never really predict when these things are going to be on an agenda for finance committee. So I don't know where that loophole is, but I like council to have that information prior to the budget so we know.
Counselor Reese?
Yeah, it's just one last question. And it has to do with the mechanics of preparing financial statements. Our budgets are all set at the end of the year, yet many of the organizations have their year ends in the fall or in December or even later, and they don't get their most recent financial statements. Is there any opportunity through you, Mayor, to Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel to ask for interim financial statements of 6 months or something of that nature, so we have something more current than maybe stale by at least a year?
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we would still want to see the final financial statements for their year end. We could look at interim accounting statements that they have at that point in time. We have to remember our budgets that we do and the budgets that are presented in a completely different version of accounting than what is in a financial statement, which is full accrual. They look very different. So we may ask for interim information that would be more similar to the way that we look at our budget information to show some of the variances that are happening at the time.
So what I heard through you, Mayor, what I heard was that no money is going to be released until those final financial statements actually come in and you have a good picture of what's happened in the previous year.
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel?
We will require the latest financial statements they have, but if our community partner is, needs financial support, if the financial statements are not available at that time, we could consider maybe a partial payment, but we'd make sure that we're still well within what would be flowed to them.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Seeing none. Thank you for developing the policy. I think it's great. I think anything that we can do to strengthen our fiscal responsibility within not only our community partners, but also just all our departments as well. And I would suggest that all the information that we get at Finance Advisory Committee is important to every member and as well to the residents of this community. Call the vote. That carries. 8.8.1, Councilor Gardner, you pulled this. I'm hoping it's new information. Do you want to move it? Thank you. Seconder? Councilor Reese, go ahead, Councilor Gardner.
Through you to Mr. Muno. So Mr. Muno, this is just, we're just going to be adding the third suites as of right, as the province has, well, they said 3 and 4, but we're just going to be adding 3 at this particular time.
Mr. Muno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Council,
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we're not going to be putting any parameters around it. City of Toronto has quite an extensive policy. Because I have heard, and other councillors have heard from residents who have third suites, garden suites on their property, on the properties next to them. Is there any way we can prioritize the zoning for third suite? Because the complete zoning bylaw will take quite a while.
Mr. Ramon,
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, yes, I mean, this is strictly just an update to our additional residential unit registration bylaw, and to go from 2 to 3, and includes inspection and compliance requirements. But we are embarking on our zoning bylaw review. I presented a work plan to council, I think, last month. We are just finalizing our procurement process. We issued an RFP, so we should have a consultant on board before the end of the year to assist us. So we'll start in earnest in the new year, and can certainly report back on perhaps prioritizing that component of the zoning review as it relates to the 3 units, but also council direction to update the zoning bylaw and look at the possibility of including 4 units where appropriate. So that's something that we can certainly endeavor to do.
Councillor,
Through Mr. Mayor, imagine that all municipalities in Ontario are trying to figure this out. And are you working with is there a group of planners in York Region that is working on this together?
Mr. Ramon.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, as you know, back in Bill 23, back in November 2022, the 3 residential units was permitted as a right by the province. So yeah, all the municipalities are dealing with this. I actually had a meeting with our N6 planning directors just this past Friday, and again, we always discuss issues and brainstorm together. So yeah, we're all in the same sort of boat. Not all of them are looking at updating the zoning bylaw. Some are. I mean, we're in a good position that we've got direction to conduct our review in 2025. So it's something that we'll definitely turn our attention to, with respect to whether there's possibility of, again, the province dealt with has also released regulations with respect to, what restrictions municipality can and cannot put in place with respect to additional residential units. But there are certain standards that we need to amend. So that'll be part of the scope of work in the new year. So I don't have a problem with, prioritizing that component of the zoning bylaw review as it relates to additional residential units and the appropriate zoning standards that go along with them.
Councillor.
That's very good news. Thank you, Mr. Muno. Just one question. In our bylaw now, it says that second suites have to adhere to fire code, building code, and electrical code, I think. So that would still be the case, notwithstanding anything that the province says. We would still have to appeal to use all of those codes.
Councillor.
To you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. Under the building code, yeah, as part of any building permit application, whether it's a second or third suite, they need to comply with building code, fire safety code as well. Yeah.
Councillor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Reese.
The quick one, I wanted to find out if Councillor Gartner was asked us on page 3 to 5, and it's through you probably to Mr. Ramono, because I believe he has the answer. It's kind of incongruous because it talks about include a section on inspection practices and issuance of orders of non-compliance, and bylaws are important to have enforcement strategies in it. And so it talks about them, but then in the end of it says that therefore it's not anticipated that enforcement for registration will occur. However, in circumstances where there's a illegal ARU and uncooperative landlords, provisions in the bylaw could be used for enforcement. So can you tell me what the problems are with the enforcement of this outside of the municipal act that says that our bylaw people are not allowed to enter a building. Is there a solution to this somewhere through you, Mayor?
Mr. Romano?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Council Weiss, and I'll turn it over to our solicitor as well. But with respect to the registration bylaw, the intent here is for any resident or any owner who comes in with a building permit application for an additional residential unit. It's a separate application. They need to comply with not only the building code, but our registration bylaw that sets out inspection and compliance provisions. So for those individuals that actually follow the process to submit a building permit, it's registered as a legal suite once our review is completed and inspections are completed. So obviously, if they submit a building permit application, we obviously have the right to enter and undertake those inspections. I think what you referred to, a couple lines there, probably relate to our ability to perhaps attain entry into suites that may not have been may not be legal because they haven't submitted the building permit application. And if those owners, prevent staff from entering, that at times could be a challenge. But our solicitor could weigh in on that.
Mr. Serio, did you want to add?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, it's exactly what Mr. Romuno said.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, that's enough then. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Call the vote. That carries. Move to 8.8.3, Councillor Gallo. It's coming on. There you go.
Thank
Do you
you.
want to move it?
So as it stands, it's to receive, correct? So I'd like to move a motion to as I understand, we've gotten an email from the applicants that they're seeking some additional time to explore other sites. So I'd like to refer this to staff to whenever they're ready to come back. And I'm happy that they're searching for other locations, and I'm happy to help them if I can. But I would also like to remove this location as one of the options.
Let me get the referral on the floor, then we can add that if you want, but I just want to get an answer from Mr. Romuno. Okay, so I'll get the referral. I need something on the floor for us to have a conversation.
Sure.
So get the referral on the floor. I got a seconder, right, Councillor Thompson. Mr. Romuno, can you respond to the fact that can we add in to remove this location as one of the possible locations?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think at that point, if council wants to go that direction, you're probably looking at making a recommendation to issue a non-consent for the tower in this location. The other option, obviously, if you refer this application to staff for a future date to let the applicant undertake their investigation on alternative sites. If they do come forward with another option, obviously before, they'll be required to go through the public engagement process. And at that point, we can obviously get them to withdraw this current application.
Yeah, so I think
That's another
procedurally,
option.
yeah, but I think procedurally we would have to vote to non-consent to this application.
That would be my request to do that now.
To do that now. So then we wouldn't be referring anything. We would just be voting to do a non-consent.
And they can come back anyway with other
Yeah.
options.
Yeah. So you want to remove your referral?
I do.
Okay. So you want to put on the floor that we do not consent to this application.
Yeah, and also encourage them to seek other sites.
And to seek other sites. We can add that language in, yes. Is there a seconder to that? Councillor Weiss, thank you. Did you get that? Thank you. I'll just wait to get the language up so we'll have a full understanding.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I think it was
Yeah, go
clear
ahead.
from all of council that location wasn't appropriate. So there's no point in having it on the list going forward. Again, I'm happy to spend time on this. I'm happy to search for other locations, and I understand the need, and I have no issues with putting that time forward.
I agree, Councillor.
I'd like to acknowledge one of my neighbors that is in the audience. That's part of the community.
Let's go.
Yep.
Good.
Mhm.
Councilor Weiss, you good? Okay, everyone else, any other comments, questions? Gonna call the vote. That carries. Okay, we'll move to 9.1. This was additional information to the proposed amendments to the parking bylaw. Someone want to move that? Councilor Thompson, thank you. Seconder. Councilor Gilliland, thank you. Any comments or questions on this one? I'm gonna call the vote. That carries. New business. Councilor Weiss. New business? Go ahead.
The controversial Bill 212 forces municipalities to seek approval to create bicycle lanes, et cetera. And I'm wondering what our response is going to be to the provincial government regarding the bike lane controversy and the influence that that may have in our community. Is there a plan somewhere to deal with 212 in this community?
Yeah, Councillor, I already issued a statement, actually, when the legislation first came out. Doesn't impact us directly, as the fact that we are not looking through our transportation plan to remove any vehicle lanes to add in bike lanes, but so it does not impact us at all. Saying that, though, I did make the statement that I do believe that the province should not be micromanaging and interfering in municipal business. So that is the sentiment right across, I think, most municipalities. But as far as the actual bike lanes and how it impact us, it will not have an impact directly to us from that perspective.
Thank you. Just wanted to hear that. And second, that's all. I'll do a public word PSA later.
Okay. Councillor Gilliland, new business?
Thank you. Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to not so sure, it might be Ms. McDougall, I'm not sure. The committees, I know that we're going to be electing some new committees, and I've been asked by some members of the community that when we advertise for these positions, that perhaps that we reach out to other communities of other groups, such as I guess you have a group of DEI groups that you reach out for culturally on several different layers of outreach. And I was asked if when we do have a release for these applications that, I don't know if it's you or if it's the clerk, I don't know who, could reach out. Are you a part? I'm sorry. Okay. So Madam Clerk, so are you part of these meetings as well? Because I just had heard that perhaps they weren't receiving these invites to apply, and it'd be a great way for us to communicate to them directly. Because I know we do things on social media, we do things through the paper and so forth. We do a lot. I know we do. I just thought this was maybe a good way to extend that invitation even further.
Deputy Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So that is a great suggestion, and we have considered that going forward. This time around, we did send a notification to a lot of our local organizations, community partners, and cultural partners as well about the application being open and within the period. And then you will see that. So that allowed us to further forward that notification to anyone who might be interested. So we did do that, but no, we will definitely take that into consideration for further improvement next time.
Perfect. Great. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Partner, new business?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With the way our budget was presented this year, there's no budget items have no individual cost attached to them. There's a total at the end of the sections, and I understand the reason for that. But through you, Mr. Mayor, a resident asked me today whether whether council will get a report on whether things came on budget, over budget, under budget, so that the public can know how much we're spending on things.
Ms. Wainwright Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So we are going to be looking at how we'll be doing the interim reporting next year. So we will still be reporting back on our progress on capital projects, any of the active projects that are underway. So there will be information coming forward. We haven't determined how it may or may not change as we look forward to next year.
Councilor.
I had a surprising number of comments about the change in the budget and that part of the budget, and I didn't know that many people paid attention to it, but good. But yeah, I think for transparency, we do have to say how much the projects ended up costing. Thank you.
Yep. Mr. Thompson. Let's go. Let's go. I just have one just to update everyone. First of all, thank you everyone for passing my motion on consent. I appreciate that. Just to give everyone a little bit of an update, that motion has passed as of today with over 45 municipalities, and it grows every day. Durham Region has passed it. This Thursday, York Region will hopefully pass it. So we're, and I'll be meeting with the AMO board this end of the week with hopefully looking at getting AMO to jump on board with that as well. So bylaws. Pardon? Oh, thank you, Councillor. Actually, I appreciate that. Totally forgot because we're here at the local side. If you don't know, our chairman, York Region Chairman Wayne Emerson is stepping down. He's decided to retire as of November 29th, which is the end of this week. There, as the process currently stands, York Region Council will be voting on a replacement. We don't know who the replacement is at this time. We haven't finished that process yet, but the province could also step in and appoint someone as well. So we're not sure what is going to happen at this point in time, but we do know that the chairman is stepping down. We wish him all the best. He's done phenomenal work for the region, cares deeply about this region, 10 years as regional chair, 17 as Stouffville's mayor, and we wish him the best in his future endeavors. Bylaws. Nope. Councilor Gallo?
Just have a question on, is it 12.1, just to confirm that that is changing the bylaw to move public planning meetings to the third Tuesday of the month.
I see the clerk's nodding yes. That's what that decision that we made. That's what that bylaw is for.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Someone want to, Councilor Gardner? Is this about the bylaws? That was on committee and no one pulled it. That was on the committee agenda. No, you have to pull it. We already moved it. We already passed it on consent. Councilor, did you want to move the file? Thank you. Seconder? Councilor Gillen, thank you. Call the vote. That carries. Confirming bylaw. Counselor Thompson, Counselor Weiss, all those in favor? Opposed, that carries. Motion to adjourn. Counselor Thompson, Kim, all those in favor? Opposed, that carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.